It hasn't happened in nearly 200 years. Constitutional experts say it would trigger a national crisis. Political scientists call it the nuclear option of British democracy. But here's the truth nobody wants you to know. King Charles III has the legal power to dismiss Keir Starmer as Prime Minister, dissolve Parliament, and force a general election, tomorrow if he wanted to. And yes, they have the power to dissolve Parliament and force a general election, just like William IV. Not theoretically, not symbolically, actually, legally, constitutionally. The power exists. It's written into British constitutional law. And while convention says it should never be used, nothing legally prevents it. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how King Charles could remove Starmer from office, what would trigger that extraordinary action, and why millions signing petitions demanding exactly that aren't as crazy as the media wants you to believe, because the power is real. Stay with me. Let's start with the fundamental constitutional reality. Britain is a constitutional monarchy. That means the crown holds reserve powers, ancient prerogatives that have never been formally abolished. The monarch could force the dissolution of Parliament through a refusal of royal assent. This would very likely lead to a government resigning. Read that again. The king can refuse to sign laws into effect, and if he does, the government would likely resign. That's not historical trivia. That's current constitutional law. Here are the specific powers King Charles holds. Every law passed by Parliament requires the king's signature to become law. By convention, he always signs, but legally he doesn't have to. The last time the royal assent was not given was in 1708, during the reign of Queen Anne. That was 317 years ago, but the power still exists. If Charles refused to sign a major piece of Starmer's legislation, it would trigger a constitutional crisis that would almost certainly end with Starmer's resignation. The king appoints the prime minister, and what can be appointed can be dismissed. The monarch's legal powers to summon and dissolve parliaments and to grant royal assent to legislation are performed automatically on prime ministerial advice, subject to a sole proviso, which is where the prime minister has lost the political authority to govern. That sole proviso is the key. If Starmer loses his authority to govern, the king can dismiss him.
But this isn't just theoretical. It's actually happened in British history, and the precedent still stands. November 1834, King William IV dismissed his Prime Minister, Lord Melbourne, without Melbourne requesting dismissal. The king believed Melbourne could no longer effectively govern, so he simply removed him from office and appointed someone else. It triggered a massive political crisis. Melbourne's supporters were outraged. Constitutional scholars debated whether the king had overstepped, but here's the crucial point. The dismissal was legal. William IV had every constitutional right to do what he did. And that precedent has never been overturned. The power that William IV used in 1834 still exists in 2025. King Charles III could do exactly what his ancestor did nearly 200 years ago. The key point to make here is that while these powers exist, they haven't been used in modern times against the wishes of the Prime Minister. Haven't been used is not the same as cannot be used. The powers are dormant, not dead. So when could King Charles actually use these powers? Constitutional experts identify several scenarios. If Starmer loses a vote of no confidence in Parliament and refuses to resign, the king could dismiss him. Starmer currently has a massive majority, so this seems unlikely. But if Labour MPs rebel en masse, it becomes possible. If Starmer attempts to implement policies that fundamentally threaten the constitutional order, say trying to abolish the monarchy without a referendum, the king could dismiss him on grounds of protecting the Constitution itself. If Starmer refuses to call an election when constitutionally required or tries to extend Parliament's term beyond legal limits, the king could force dissolution. This is the most subjective and most powerful. The monarch's legal powers are subject to a sole proviso, which is where the prime minister has lost the political authority to govern. If Starmer becomes so unpopular, so ineffective, so discredited that he's clearly lost the authority to govern, the king could arguably dismiss him even without a parliamentary vote. This is the nuclear option, and it's the one that petitions calling for royal intervention are based on.
So let's wargame this. Let's say King Charles decides tomorrow that Keir Starmer has lost the political authority to govern and must be dismissed. What actually happens? Charles informs Starmer that he is dismissing him as Prime Minister, effective immediately. The king dissolves Parliament. A dissolution proclamation is authorized by the king at a meeting of the Privy Council. Charles invites someone else, likely the leader of the opposition or a senior statesman, to form a caretaker government and prepare for elections. A general election is called, probably within weeks. Britain explodes into constitutional debate unlike anything seen in modern history. Labour would scream about royal overreach, Conservatives might defend the king's action, Reform UK would probably celebrate, the media would be in meltdown. International observers would question Britain's democratic stability. But here's the key. All of it would be legal. Charles would have used powers that exist in constitutional law. He wouldn't have broken any rules. He would simply have used authority that's been dormant for 190 years. Now let's be realistic. Despite having the power, King Charles almost certainly will never use it against Starmer. Why? The unwritten rule of British monarchy is that these powers exist but are never used. The moment Charles uses them, he transforms from constitutional monarch to active political player. And that would destroy the monarchy's carefully maintained neutrality. The backlash would be enormous. Half the country would see it as royal overreach, an unelected king overruling democracy. The monarchy's survival depends on being seen as above politics, not interfering in it. Despite being unpopular, Starmer commands a majority in Parliament. Dismissing a prime minister who still has parliamentary support would be nearly impossible to justify constitutionally. Who would Charles appoint in Starmer's place? There's no obvious alternative government waiting. Without that, dismissal would just create chaos without solving anything. So, while the power exists, the circumstances that would justify using it probably don't exist yet.
But here's where it gets interesting. What if circumstances change? What if Starmer's government becomes so unpopular, so dysfunctional, so clearly lacking authority that even constitutional experts start saying, maybe the king should step in? What if 3 million petition signatures become 5 million? 10 million? What if polls show 70% of Britons want Starmer removed? What if Labour MPs start openly calling for him to go, but he refuses? At some point, the theoretical becomes practical. At some point, hasn't been used in 200 years becomes, maybe it's time. And here's the truly fascinating constitutional question. If millions of citizens are demanding the king use his legal powers to remove a prime minister who's clearly lost authority to govern, is refusing to act more dangerous to the monarchy than acting? The king finds himself in a constitutionally awkward position. He has powers he's supposed to never use, but what if not using them becomes the greater constitutional crisis? So here's the uncomfortable reality. King Charles III legally can remove Keir Starmer from office. The power exists, the precedent exists, the constitutional mechanism exists. He almost certainly won't do it, but almost certainly won't is not the same as cannot, and that distinction matters. Every constitutional expert who says the king can't just dismiss the prime minister is lying. What they mean is the king shouldn't, or the king probably won't, but can? Yes. Legally, constitutionally, historically, yes, he can. The Fixed-Term Parliaments Act 2011 removed some of these powers temporarily, but that act was repealed in 2022. Parliament is dissolved by the king on the prime minister's request, but nowhere does it say the king must wait for a request. Nowhere does it say he cannot act unilaterally if constitutional necessity demands it. King Charles III has the power to remove Keir Starmer as Prime Minister. It's not a myth, it's not speculation, it's constitutional law. The power hasn't been used in 190 years. It probably won't be used now, but it exists. And in a functioning constitutional monarchy, the existence of power is sometimes more important than its use. Starmer knows that every week when he sits with Charles for their private audience, he knows he serves at the pleasure of a monarch who, if pushed far enough, could legally end his government tomorrow. That's the constitutional sword hanging over every British Prime Minister. It's almost never used, but it's always there. What do you think? Should King Charles have these powers at all? Should he ever use them? If not now, then when? Share your thoughts below because this is the most important constitutional question in Britain right now, and most people don't even know the power exists. If this video exposed constitutional powers you never knew existed, share it everywhere, because when millions are signing petitions demanding the king act, they should understand he legally could. He just probably won't. And that probably is doing a lot of work.